This is a crochet tutorial for the Granny Squares Rainbow Baby Blanket. Here's a baby blanket made up of granny squares in various colors. I used double knit wool from West Yorkshire spinners called ColourLab. It is 100% natural wool, locally reared, sheared, and spun here in the UK. It comes in 18 beautiful shades, and I have 10 here. The link to the free pattern is in the description of this video. Apart from combining granny squares, you can also make a continuous granny square to make your baby blanket. In this case, you can say you're making a giant granny square. I suggest either using one solid color or self-striping yarn, such as ColourLab self-striping, which is available in Summer Pinks, Frosty Blues, Technicolor, and Prism Bright. It is important to bear in mind that the resulting size of your granny square will depend not only on the thickness of your yarn and how tightly you crochet. It will also depend on the size of your crochet hook. Here I have 3 granny squares, each one made using a different crochet hook size, but all of them using double knit wool. Our first one uses 3 millimeters, the second one uses 3.5 millimeters, and the third one uses 4 millimeters. Comparing these 3 granny squares, you will see that the difference in sizes is quite significant. For the overall baby blanket I want, which is 30 by 40 inches, the size of the granny square that I need results using 4 millimeter crochet hook. This is also known as size G. Apart from a crochet hook, you will also need a pair of scissors and some yarn. All crochet terms are in US terms. For an in-depth look at any of our crochet stitches, I've included a video link in the description of this video. We start off with the magic circle. We loop the yarn twice around our pointer finger. Insert the hook through both strands, pull through, yarn over, and pull through a second time to finish the magic circle. And then we chain 3. And this counts as a double crochet. Double crochet in the magic circle. Yarn over, insert hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through the final 2 loops on the hook. And then we work another double crochet in the magic circle. So we end up with 3 double crochet stitches, which is actually our basic granny square stitch. And then we chain 2. And then we work 3 double crochet stitches in the magic circle again. So here's our first double crochet. One, two, and 3. So now we have 2 granny stitches, and then we chain 2. We work another 3 double crochet in the magic circle. Here's our first double crochet, second double crochet, and our third double crochet. So we now have 3 granny stitches composed of 3 double crochet stitches. And then we chain 2. We work 3 double crochet in the magic circle. Here's our first one, second one, and third one. So now we have 4 granny stitches. First, second, third, and fourth. and then we chain 2, and then we close the magic circle by pulling the loose yarn as tightly as we can. To complete this first row, we're going to slip stitch at the top of the first stitch, which happens to be the chain 3 start of this row. So here's our chain 3. Insert the hook, and then slip stitch. So this is row number 1. We start row 2. We slip stitch through the closest chain space from where we are, which is right here. And then we chain 4. This counts as a double crochet and a chain 1, and then we work 3 double crochet stitch in the next space. So 1, 2, and 3, and then we do a chain 2, and then work 3 double crochet stitches in the same chain space. So 1, 2, and 3. So this is the basic sequence every time we encounter a corner. We have 2 granny stitches and a chain 2 space. We do chain 1 here, and here's another corner. We work 3 double crochet in this space. 1, 2, and 3, and then chain 2 again. 3 double crochet in the same space. And then we do another chain 1, and then in the next corner we're going to work 3 double crochet. So 1, 2, 3, chain 2 again, and 3 double crochet in the same space. So you can see there's a pattern. Every time we encounter a corner, we have 2 granny stitches with chain 2 between each of these granny stitches. Here on the 4th one, we already have a chain stitch which counts as a double crochet. So we do a chain 1, we work 3 double crochet in the 4th corner. So here's our first one, second one, third one, and then we chain 2. And then instead of doing 3 double crochet, we only need 2 double crochet. just because we already have a chain stitch which counts as a double crochet. So to finish this row off, we're going to slip stitch at the top of the chain 3 stitch that we started our second row. So here we have 2 rows for our granny square. As you can see, for our second row we have these 4 corners, which consists of 2 pairs of granny stitches and a chain 2 space. Here's our first and our second granny stitches. That's one corner, our second corner, third corner, and fourth corner. Then we work on row number 3. We start this off by slip stitching in this chain space. Chain 3, and this chain 3 counts as a double crochet. We work 2 more double crochet in the same chain space. So this counts as a granny stitch. It looks like 3 double crochet in the same chain space. Chain 1, and then since the next is a chain space at the corner, we work the sequence for a corner, which means we need to work 2 pairs of granny stitches, but between these 2 stitches we need a chain 2 space. So to break it down, that means we need to work 3 double crochet, which we have, and then chain 2, and then work another 3 double crochet in the same chain space. So here is the first corner for row number 3. Chain 1, and the next space is not a corner. We simply work a granny stitch in this space, which is 3 double crochet. So here's our first double crochet, our second double crochet, and our third. Chain 1, so here's our simple granny stitch. Since the next is a corner stitch, we need to do a corner sequence. So 3 double crochet. So here's our first one, second, and third, and then we need a chain 2 before we start our second granny stitch, which is 3 double crochet in the same chain space. So this is corner number 2. So here's the space right here. We need to chain 1 and work a granny stitch in this space, or 3 double crochet in the same space. Chain 1. The next is a corner space, so we need to do a corner sequence. So that's 2 pairs of granny stitches with chain 2 between these 2 stitches. So that is 3 double crochet stitches, followed by a chain 2, and then 3 double crochet in the same chain space to complete our corner sequence. And then we do a chain 1 since we're working with a simple space here, so we need to work a granny stitch in this space, so that's 3 double crochet, chain 1. The next is again a corner stitch, so that's 3 double crochet followed by chain 2, and we end this corner sequence with 3 double crochet in the same chain space. And then chain 1. So as you can see, we already have another granny stitch here, so we complete this row by simply slip stitching at the top of this first stitch, which happens to be a chain 3 stitch. So here we have 3 rows for our granny square. So you'll find we have, of course, 4 corners. Every row will have 4 corners, but for every corner you will have 2 granny stitches and a chain 2 as transition, and between these corners we will have simple granny stitches, essentially clusters of double crochet stitches. As you can see, in every corner we have chain 2, and to transition between granny stitches we have chain 1. We start with row number 4 with a slip stitch in the closest chain space. Chain 4, and this chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. And then we work a granny stitch in the next chain space. So that's 3 double crochet. So here's our first one. Second one, and our third, followed by a chain 1. The next space is a corner space, so we do a corner sequence. So 2 pairs of granny stitches separated by a chain 2. So chain 2 and another cluster, chain 1, granny stitch in this space, chain 1. Next space we work 1 granny stitch, consists of 3 double crochet stitch, chain 1, and then we have a corner, so we do a corner sequence. That's 3 double crochet, followed by chain 2 and 3 double crochet in the same chain space. Chain 1, work a granny stitch in the next space, chain 1, work a granny stitch in the following space, chain 1, corner sequence, that's 3 double crochet, chain 2, followed by 3 double crochet in the same chain space to finish off this corner sequence. Chain 1, work a granny stitch in the next space, chain 1, work another granny stitch in the next space, chain 1, and then the next space is the last corner, so we do a corner sequence, so we do 1 granny stitch followed by a chain 2 space, and then work a second granny stitch in the same chain space. And then in the next space we need to work a granny stitch, but since we already have a chain there which counts as a double crochet, we only need to work 2 double crochet stitch. Chain 1, work 2 double crochet stitch to complete the granny stitch in the last space we need to work on, and then we need to slip stitch at the top of a chain 3. So just look for the 3rd chain and then slip stitch. So this should complete row number 4 and this last granny stitch. Just like the previous row, apart from the corner spaces, we have a granny stitch or a cluster of 3 double crochet in every chain space of the previous row. And then we separate these clusters with a chain 1. We start with row number 5 by slip stitching in the chain space, chain 3, and then we work 2 double crochet in the same space to complete our first granny stitch for this row. Chain 1, work a granny stitch in the next chain space, chain 1. So we continue with the pattern that we've been working on for every row. And here we're almost finished with row number 5. To complete this, we slip stitch at the top of this chain 3. So this is the granny square with 5 rows. For row 5, each side has 5 clusters of double crochet, or we can say we have 5 granny stitches in total. Each corner consists of 2 granny stitches, and we have chain 2 between these 2 granny stitches. Between these corner stitches we have 3 granny stitches per side. with a chain 1 transition between them. You can keep 5 rows to make your granny square, as I have, or you can keep adding rows. For example, if you want to make a giant granny square, just remember to follow the rules. So for each corner, you need to work 2 pairs of granny stitches with a chain 2 between them. Then for each chain space apart from the corner, you need to work 1 granny stitch, or a cluster of double crochet stitches using a chain 1 to transition between stitches. To secure the last row, make a final chain before cutting the yarn. Here are a few granny squares I've made. Apart from the simplicity of this pattern, one of the nice things about a granny square is that there's a sense of accomplishment for each one you've completed. It doesn't take much time to make one. Of course, you can also make a giant granny square to make your blanket, just like this one, using ColourLab's Summer Pinks. If you do want to make a giant granny square, you will end up with a square blanket. Other self-striping prints available for the ColourLab include Technicolor, Frosty Blues, and Prism Bright. To make my baby blanket, I want to combine these granny squares by stitching them together with a yarn needle. There are a number of ways to join granny squares. I will show this one method in this video. For this demo, I'm using a contrasting color yarn so you can see where my stitches go. Normally, you'd use the same color yarn as one of the granny squares you're joining. We start by inserting our needle from the back to the front of one of the stitches close to the edge of one piece. And then matching both granny squares together, relocate the matching stitch at the other piece. And then we do the same. We insert from back to front. And then we go back to the first piece. We insert the needle again back to front through the next stitch. Then we go back to the second piece, insert the needle back to front through the next stitch. So we keep doing this until we reach the end for both squares. So this is actually called the mattress stitch. So we need to make sure that we match the stitches for both pieces. Then we join the next piece that goes at the top and also to the left of the yellow square. So I would suggest laying out all your pieces first and deciding your design before joining them together. So here's another example where I use a red central piece and joining the orange and pink squares, and I use red yarn to join them. Here we have a pink square. It's the last piece to be joined to the rest of my project. In this case, we use pink yarn to join. As before, we insert the needle from back to front near one corner of the granny square, and then we insert the needle in a matching stitch in the violet piece, again from back to front. I like to position my work so that the line I'm joining goes from left to right, since I'm left-handed. If you're right-handed, I suggest you position your work so that the line goes from right to left. Now, when do we stop? We stop at the first chain when we reach a chain 2 space before we move on to the next corner. You can see here that for the 3 double crochet cluster, each double crochet matches with its corresponding stitch on the other side of this join. This is true as well for the first chain of the chain 2 space. Then we turn our work so we can join the orange square to the pink square. So we insert the needle in the corresponding chain. Let's say for the orange, we go from back to front. So it's actually the chain closest to the granny stitch. And then we go to the pink side, we insert the needle in the same or corresponding chain. Then we continue with this mattress stitch along this line. Then we stop at the first chain and then we move on. Do the same with the purple and pink granny squares. So making sure that we are joining matching stitches or matching chains. So the last stitch actually would be the first chain from the granny stitches for both colors. So that was the last stitch we joined. So after that, we simply weave in ends with our yarn needle by inserting through a few times to secure the yarn. So 2 reasons why we're doing this. First one is we want to hide this loose yarn, and second reason, I think, and also the most important, is we want to secure the yarn so it doesn't unravel. We don't want any baby blankets to be unraveling while baby is using it. We do the same for all the loose ends throughout the project. There you go. Enjoy making your own baby blanket. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.